Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you in here today. Let's see if I can actually log into my laptop. That's the first quest to conquer. All right, can everybody see the screen? Oh, that started quickly. Anyway, welcome. It's a pleasure to be in here with you. I will wait before the AV guys get this right. And actually, I have one thing to resolve, let's say, because yes, I did fly from California, but 3 weeks ago when I actually moved to Tampa Bay. So these days I'm actually living around here. We just moved to St. Petersburg. And I've been with Avast for about 10 years. I started as a reverse engineer by actually hacking into the company at the age of 19. And then I went through multiple positions. One of the things you might have heard of in the past is Avast mobile security application. So I was actually a product manager for it. And now I'm basically leading the integrations with the US carriers. So I'm working daily with the AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile in the US and sort of making them happy with the integrations we can do for them. And for the rest of the things, I would really need to have a slides.
We don't. I'm getting stuff. I have no idea.
Can you guys actually see my video feed?
We can.
Awesome.
Give me a second. I just went to sleep. By the way, can you shoot fingernails for me one more time? I keep mine awfully short.
There we go.
Now you're having fun with it. Okay, we're waiting.
There we go.
I think that was trying to see if it's having enough charge.
Here we go. Everybody can see it on the second screen? Perfect. So, welcome again. With that said, it's not there? Oh, man.
I'll get that one going too. This has enough battery charge that it's able for you.
Thank you.
I'll see if I can get the other one going.
This time? In the back? Better? Not yet?
Lighting, I'm not sure about.
It's there? I can see it now. Perfect. All right. So welcome again. Now we can finally start it. So before I actually get into the details, I'm just curious, how many of you ever heard of Avast before? It's less than half, I would say, actually. So I will give you a quick introduction about the company so you actually understand who we are and what we do. We are in the cybersecurity space. We've been founded about 30 years ago in Czechoslovakia back then, so these days Czech Republic. It's still sort of mainly, the headquarters and the engineering is still mainly in Czech Republic at the moment. And we protect about 20% of the end consumers around the world. That means basically about 20% of the end users of laptops, PCs, and so on are actually using some of the Avast products. That's about 435 plus monthly active millions monthly active users. It's massive. And for that reason, we needed a lot of AI and automated detections to actually protect them. And I will talk about the two different topics today, slightly about the IoT, slightly about the AI and the detections, and it all come together because what we're trying to build is the sort of automated engine which pulls all these things combined together. Maybe some of you never heard of AVG. AVG is actually part of the Avast family these days. So if you're using AVG antivirus or Avast antivirus, it's all the same. It's basically built by the one company at the moment. Same engine, same main pieces. With that said, I have one puzzle for you. How many users do you think we have in the United States, plus minus? And I will give you a really good big flash drive for it. Anybody who wants to tip? Plus. Who said 50? No. It's a 54 million. So gentleman over there who said 50, who said 60 is probably getting this. Was you, right? I can start to throw it in there. Just come and pick it up. I'll leave it in here. All right, so we have 54 million users in the United States, which is quite a lot. And what I will be showing you today are a couple of the statistics about the data we've seen in the United States and compare them to the global data we've seen across the remaining parts of the world. So that might be interesting. With that said, I wanted to start with the IoT in general and give you an overview because that's where I see the problems are starting. The good thing about IoT, of course, is that we all love it. We all have our connected homes these days. We all are using a Google Home. We all are using cameras, smart detectors, smart TVs, smart DVRs, laptops, cell phones. Everything is basically connected. But the problem starts when any attacker basically can access at least one of those devices. So the problem is that your entire home is basically as secure as its weakest chain and or weakest part of the chain. That means that eventually if somebody can breach your TV, he can theoretically use it to control other devices at home. Or if I breach the web camera, for example, I can start controlling other devices at home. It's not necessarily a rule for each of the devices, but it's a really common trend these days, that you are sort of at that point in a trusted environment, and that trusted environment can basically compromise all the other devices within that home. So with that said, I had a few funny stories to mention. Maybe you've heard of recently, I think it was in Iowa, there was a family who was basically calling the police about them being spied by the web camera at their home and voices coming from their speaker because the attacker basically gained the control of their home. It was a simple baby camera, I think it was a Filip Chytry camera, which basically compromised the entire home network. The other trend we've actually seen globally, and that's a funny one, and I will give you some examples, are the smart coffee machines and smart kettles these days. They are really easily hackable because they have sort of unprotected network, so basically no encryption or anything, no handling, and you can just simply send a command. So what we have in here today as the two props are the two quite common smart coffee machine and a kettle, and there are about 80,000 of those, which I will show you in a minute how can be potentially hacked. Of course, one of the major problems with all those interconnected devices are the DDoS attacks. So once somebody slaves such a device, so when somebody actually hacks the IoT device, they're mostly used to basically attack the other servers, for example. So 2 years ago, there was a Mirai botnet attacking the Twitter servers. I'm not sure if it take them down in the US, but in Europe at least, the Twitter was out for a couple hours just because of the attacks from the IoT devices. With that said, I promised you some of the data about the United States. So as a part of our PC engine, there is a component which we call a home network security. This home network security component is basically scanning surrounding devices inside of your home and looking into the potential problems. So these are not even all the problems which could be there, but those are only the high-level ones which we can afford to scan, let's say, by the simple scan. So that means we are, for example, trying to do things like, what is the password of the device? Is it admin, or is it like, admin 12345? You wouldn't believe it, how many of those devices around the US are still using those, right? So from all those scans, I've only picked a few top categories in here and basically listed a percentage of how many of them are vulnerable. So you see, for example, DVRs, the multimedia centers at homes. We haven't scanned that many of them in the last 30 days. Those are actually data from yesterday. But we still find about 500 of them, almost 500 of them vulnerable. That's basically putting the 14% share in terms of vulnerability of devices. The routers are still a massive problem. As you can see, routers is something we scanned mostly. So 9.3 million routers have been scanned within the last 30 days, but almost 10% of them are actually vulnerable and hackable. That means, again, the attacker can potentially cause a lot of trouble to your home network or to any network. What I was really surprised by are the network nodes. Because network nodes in this case are meaning the routers of the carriers, which we can sometimes scan, depends on the configuration of the home. And you still see that they had some vulnerabilities. Either it wasn't updated, either it still had some basic password. And a few other categories, home network storages, so data centers for your home, smart security cameras, and printers. And I have another question for you guys in here, again for the flash drive. In which category you think, there are actually 3 right answers in here, the US is doing worse than the rest of the world? Who said what? Okay. I didn't realize it would be that big conference, to be honest, so I didn't think of how to solve this situation. So, let me put it this way. I have quite a few of those flash drives, so whoever said camera, I will trust you when you come after the conference to pick it up, okay? So, there are actually 3 categories where the US is doing slightly worse than the global data, what I found out. So multimedia centers, it's because probably they are more spread in here, but eventually quite a few of the multimedia centers at homes are problematic. Then home data attached storages are actually, if you see the comparison to the rest of the world, and smart security cameras. It's probably because there is just a bigger penetration of those devices in the US than in the rest of the world. With that said, I have one really nice example of how the smart camera can be hacked. It's basically using a simple rainbow table commands to try to access a telnet. I don't know if all of you know what the telnet is, but it basically allows you to tap into the feed and basically control the camera over the network really easily. And in here, it's basically a visualization of the real network traffic of what is going on when you are attacking such a device. So basically in here, you would see a normal home performing with the camera and few other devices being connected. And in a minute from now, let's see how fast it will go. You will see basically telnet commands trying to access a device as a device administrator by just simply tapping in the most common passwords and logins. In this particular case, we've actually used a camera, I believe it was the Filip Chytry camera, which had a backdoor for the administrator access with the predefined password from the manufacturer. So it's not even something really hard. So you see on the right side that there are random passwords popping up into the camera and trying to connect to it and basically access it. Here we go. Now we basically gain the access over the telnet of the camera. And now we will start with replacing the payload on the camera. So basically putting our small piece of software on it that we can remotely control it wherever we need and basically control all the other devices within that home. At this point, at the normal stage, this would have been protected by the antivirus because we would find out that there's a lot of touches on the network. But for our case in here, we would let it go. So basically you see that has been detected by the antivirus, but we turn that detection on and off and let that be. And now the camera itself is basically scanning all the other surrounding devices. So it has the option to basically scan your entire home network and trying to interact with the other devices within your home using just a simple terminal, command Unix terminal, and start sending the commands across your home. So, with that said, I think it's a time, because it's early in the morning, to start with our morning coffee routine in here. And what you actually need as a good recipe is to start with this. So what you've seen has been how you basically can easily gain the access of the simple camera. So in our case in here on the stage, we have a D-Link camera, which you can these days buy for $45 on Amazon, which has this sort of variety of vulnerabilities you can actually use to gain the access. You have an exploit database. You also have an exact link for the exploit I'm using for that specific camera. And we have a smart coffee machine, which you can again buy on Amazon for $200, $250 at the moment. With that said, let's proceed with a small demo. So, what I have in here is basically predefined. Oh, you can't see my screen. Let me see. Okay, let's do it this way then. There you go. So what I have in here is a really simple predefined bash script, which basically attacks and commands the camera to turn the commands on the home network in this case. So camera is using a predefined password from the manufacturer, which we basically find out by just testing the passwords and everything. And we will send a command to the camera to brew a coffee. So let's see if that will work out. Oops. So we're trying to connect to the camera and send a command to basically brew a coffee. Here we go. few more mugs, and feel free to serve yourself if you have a taste for the coffee. Actually, is there anybody who prefers a tea? I'm just curious. I mean, we can do the same for the smart kettle, let me turn it on just in case somebody changes his mind. Same thing, basically connecting to the camera and commanding the smart kettle to turn on basically and start, brewing the water. The problem in here is that with this network command line, I can actually command the coffee machine to forget about the pot even, because the coffee machine settings allow you to turn off the detection of the pot. So theoretically, we can basically keep brewing a coffee without pot being in there and spoil it around the ground of your floor at home, right? So that's not really a fun. So, what you just seen with the D-Link camera is basically applicable to plenty of devices. As I kind of stated, this is applicable to a lot of printers, all the other attached devices you potentially can have. But what I did yesterday at night, I basically realized, let's make it more personal to you guys in here in Tampa. So, how many of you ever heard of Shodan? Is there anybody heard of Shodan? That's nice, at least half or maybe 1/3. So Shodan is basically a web tool, let's say these days, which is mapping attached devices on the internet. So basically, maybe some of you heard of Nmap and other tools. So this is really similar, scanning a network for potential IoT devices which could be hackable. So on a Shodan, you will find out there are around 244,000 devices around Tampa Bay, which are displayed in the database. And from those, you can actually find out which of those are potentially hackable. So what I did is I basically did a simple research, just looking through what is as close as possible to this to this center, and we find out that around the University of South Florida, there are a couple of smart cameras which could be hacked, because both of them, the axis on the top and the axis on the bottom, are not using the latest firmware, and they have a few ports open, so that basically allows you to connect to it. For the other example, I will be using the Sony camera in here. So this is a Sony camera released in 2013, I believe, but it wasn't patched. So the camera itself, we know the IP. I basically hide it so you guys don't actually try it. But but normally, if you actually research it, you will find the IP. You will find quite a few information. That Sony camera is within the Marine Center of the University of South Florida in here, right? And if you research the details about the Sony camera and how to attach it, you basically find a CVE vulnerability on the website just by searching for the vulnerability and the name of the camera. And you find out what are the ways how to basically gain the access of such a device. And as you see that with this particular case of the Sony, there is not even authentication required. So in a very simplistic way, when you are logging into the camera itself, it's not even protected. So you can even listen to the network commands coming in and out, because it's not even HTTPS or any encryption. It's over basically HTTP, not even protected commands. So with that said, I just wanted to highlight the major problems we are facing. So you have hundreds of, I would say even maybe thousands of different brands and devices coming to the market from companies who are used to building a smart fridge. And these days, they used to building fridges, and these days they decided, hey, let's make that fridge smart. Let's buy some cheap components from China, plug them in, and use their, SDKs, or use their software development kits to basically monitor a fridge and get some of the details in there. The problem is these companies basically don't have a mindset of building those devices in a secure way, because they never done it in the past. And it's a big opportunity for all of you in here, because there is a lot to improve these days. So what you see in here are just a few brands I could think of, and we were trying to figure it out how to protect them, because this is really painful. You can't really put the software on every single one of them, but what you can do is to be in between them and the internet connection. And I will get into there with an AI a little bit and how we basically try to detect that. So now we know what the problem is. We basically know there are more and more connected devices. They are built by non-security companies, so not all of them are really secured, just to kind of offset the fear in here. Alexa, Google, and all those are quite okay, actually. They are rarely never patched. So that was the example of the camera within the campus in here. The Sony camera is actually using all firmware, so it could be potentially used to hack the network. And they could command all the other devices in there. So what we try to do in here is to basically create a fingerprint for most of the behaviors of each of these attached devices. So normally, you don't want your fridge to communicate to China. You just want your fridge to communicate to the nearest backend. And if that behavior is sort of predefined, because the set of functions is predefined, it's a sort of repeating itself over and over and over again. So you don't really have to think about what to detect for such a device, because it's opaque, it's, repeating behavior. So you are only looking into the certain patterns you have to look for. And therefore, it's quite easy to create the algorithms and the automated machine learning to protect it. So with that said, I have one more example in here. Again, sort of really close to the cameras and all those devices. What you see on the screen right now is the point of infection. So before the point of infection on the left side, it's basically a home network behaving in a normal way. So what we monitor for the connections to the specific IPs and domains. We monitor for timestamps, let's say. We monitor for the packet payloads. We monitor for, destinations, as I said, and so on. And we changes of the behavior. So if that's a fridge or if that's the camera, why it should start behaving the way it was never behaving before. So on the right side of the point of infection, what you see is actually a fingerprint of the camera behavior being malicious, where you see that we already have classified the servers for Mirai command and control, Mirai report, and Mirai botnet. So we already know there's a traffic coming from those servers. And we also see the camera is basically doing what our camera just did in here, which is start scanning all the other surrounding devices and sending the commands. So now we will get a little bit into this AI part, which is not going to be that easy to explain, because what we're trying to build is sort of an overlapping AI across all the engines and systems. So we have a different machine learning parts, learning data from different behavioral patterns. So learning from PC, learning from mobile, learning from IoT devices. And we try to make the AI to think about how this all is cross-connected and how this all is basically being used or can be used across the devices and across the platforms. So kind of normal techniques in the past what people have been using is really simple. It's to start with the observation. So learn as much as possible about, a system. By the way, it seems the camera is still keep turning on the kettle. I probably forget to kill the terminal. So you have to start with the observation. So you try to collect as much as possible of the information about anything, about the data on the network, about the problems on a PC. Then you start with the analysis, so what these patterns can actually tell you and how they are comparable to the things you've already learned, so the things which have been classified as malicious, good, or bad. And then you have to figure out the result. So the result part is the part where it's really driven by the automated systems, because for everything else, you can sort of use the machine learning clusters and so on to kind of figure it out, hey, this was the good, this was the bad. But for the result-oriented, what you need to do is to create as small as possible package, which you can deliver to the user, in our case, to 435 million users, in as fast possible way as possible. At the same time, it has to have a really small footprint, because you really don't want to, the official update on our side would have like hundreds of megabytes with the full fingerprint of the behavior, right? So you need to figure out a way how to make it like 1 or 2 megabytes, which you can stream to the user almost continuously, through the day. So with that, I wanted to go a little bit deeper into the engines which are included in this sort of machine learning, and then the simplification, which are going to the user itself. So you have a web shield, that's a really simple one, protecting you against the web browsing and web problems. Then you have a static scanner. Maybe some of you heard of the multi-strings and strings. So basically just defined pieces of code which you are scanning for. Then you have an emulator. So basically a behavior on the PC itself based on the behavior, based on the network behavior, based on the IoT behavior on the network again, all this sort of emulated data. Then we have a deep screen, as we call it, that basically requires a submit of the sample to our backend and run a deep scan in the sandbox. So there are 2 versions of sandbox on our side. One, a lighter version on the user device, and really a deep one, because, for example, for the IoT devices and for Android devices, you cannot really have a emulator on them itself really easily to actually do the sandboxing on the device for the user. So that goes back to our backends. We have a cyber capture, which basically allows us to, run a really all in. So if there's something new coming to the market and we never seen it and we see it spreading really quickly. We basically put it in our cyber capture, which is a more powerful way of sandboxing, let's say. And a behavior shield, which is, again, monitoring for the behavior. And again, this is for PC, slightly for the Android, and slightly for the network. So our biggest challenge in here is the number of data we have to deal with. So in here you have an examples of how many terabytes of data we have to process daily. So daily we have to process about 390 terabytes of data, and we have about 30% of them, or actually 25% of them, classified as malicious or potentially dangerous. And at the same time, you see that big amount of data being processed, but you still have to ship those updates to the end users. So daily, we ship about 50 petabytes of data to the end users, just to kind of, hey, giving you the update. It's a massive amount of data. 10,000 servers, 300 million files, and 200 billion domains. Actually, those are yearly numbers. So I can show you this live after, but this will give you an overview what was happening yesterday in the morning when I take the screenshot of the video. So those were the data we are all keep talking about right now, and the different engines protecting them. And what you see on the screen right now are basically an attacks towards our user base in sort of real time 24 hours ago. When you see the dotted lines, those are representing infections for the PC. So basically those are being payloads for the end users on the PC devices. And when you see the circled orange circles, those are infections for IoT devices. So those are basically being payloads trying to attack IoT device, or those are being vulnerabilities at the same time, which kind of discovered. Sometimes you will notice a green square. A green square actually represents the Android devices and Android detection on the Android phone. With that said, this is only 10% of what was going on yesterday, because if I show all 100%, it's too messy. Like nobody would even, even now it's looking like a nuclear war, right? It's like somebody's shooting missiles all over the place, but if you display all 100, you're like, hey, what's going on? It's like too much. So let's kind of give you an overview of like how much of things is actually going on in the real world, right? You don't really realize that when you are sitting in front of the computer. You don't even really know that, hey, this is so much of going in the background. So with that said, I would just want to remap and kind of refresh what is basically happening with everything coming to Avast or to our backends. So first and foremost, the big advantage we have is the amount of users. The only reason why we can afford to have so many free users and actually do this freemium model, so basically offer a basic antivirus for free, is because it's helping us to enhance the engine itself and helping us to cut off the costs of the employees, helping us to cut off the costs of malware researchers and all these people, basically involved in the other security companies, because everything else is kind of taken care of automatically. So we have about 6 times more users than our nearest competitor at the moment in terms of data coming to Avast. All the things are coming to our systems are basically coming through the automated process of extraction of data. So learn as much as you can learn about any sample and any data coming to our system. That's basically our philosophy in here. So I have an example for executable files for PC. We do about 500 different features. These includes simple things like origin, where that sample came from, how quickly it's spreading, how many times we've seen it across the user base, how big is that sample, what is the file checksum, what is the entropy, and it goes much more into the details, like what were the libraries loaded, what were the or what are the screens presented and kind of touched when it's running in the sandbox. From that set, you basically run into the training session. So you feed all this data into the automatic training, and this is partly when it's getting connected with the AI and machine learning. I actually personally don't believe in an AI completely. It's more like all it's advanced machine learning to me, but it's keep improving, but more like on machine learning. Anyway, the training part is basically using data and clusters we sort of pre-classified in the past and keeps building on top of it. So it's basically training itself in terms of, hey, now we have a new behavior pattern, which we know is bad and malicious. How much I can simplify that pattern to make it as short as possible, so create as short description as possible, that it will still be effective, it will cover as many samples as possible, and at the same time, it will don't create any false positives. So that means it will not create any detection for the samples which are, let's say, clean and good for your device, right? That process is running over and over again every 3 minutes right now when it's getting shipped to the users, and I will show you how often we actually update the user base. And then you come to this execution part, where again, from this training set, it's basically being tested in the execution against the good and clean samples. So there's a massive clean set database on our side of the good behavior, where we compare whatever we created in this sort of training and execution phase, if it's good or bad, and how to classify it. From that, I wanted to give you this overview to understand the structure behind it, and then I will show you a little bit about the products. So basically, there are different 4 main pieces of where this AI is trying to leverage this information automatically across the platforms. So you have a threat analytics. Those are focused on the PC, mobile, and so on. And we have automated different systems for each of the subcategories. So we call it Odin, for example, for PC. It's keep brewing the water. It's keep turning on because I haven't killed the camera. Sorry about that. Then we have a Chadron, which is for the Android samples. So just the namings for us. But each of them has this dedicated machine learning set for a dedicated platform, let's say. Then we have a domain kind of classification, and automated labeling is sort of something we are working on right now, that when we find the behavior on the PC and on the device itself, we just want to figure it out the naming in a meaningful way to the user based on the behavior. Because these days, what the companies are doing, most of us are doing, is like, when we find something really new and fresh, we just name it with some sort of I would say this checksum or small hash name and say it's bad before we actually deeply analyze it. Sometimes you have a trigger if it's the detection based on something you've really seen in the past, but if it's something really new, it's a sort of 0 day, then it's really hard to classify it by the real name or a behavior. So that's the threat analytics part. Then you have an IoT part, which I'm going to show you a demo a little bit. So you're trying to learn all these patterns from the home network security scanner or from the devices we actually have deployed within the homes of our users. So we have a firmware and an attached device for the network. And you create this sort of global map of attacks and global map of home devices and the data again, which could be potentially dangerous. And you try to kind of split this into our corner point, which we call a digital health. And that's actually what we are really successful at in US. So when I mention these all US carriers, maybe some of you have a Verizon FamilyWare. Maybe some of you have AT&T Smart Family solution. So all these things, that's actually in a different space. It's a family protection, let's say. It's built by Avast for these carriers, and we basically white label it for them. So all these technologies in background are cross-integrated and creating communication between each other. So if we classify something as a social media domain, and if we classify it, for example, as adult content which shouldn't be accessible to the kids, it automatically is getting propagated to this digital health space where it's updating the end user devices of AT&T, Verizon, and others wherever they want to block within their products. So if I go a step beyond that, there are basically 5 different spaces where this AI is kind of mixing up the data across the product portfolios. So you have a main collection coming from IoT and on-device. So on-device is represented by the endpoint solution, so antivirus, let's say. The IoT is represented by the attached home network devices. And then we try to leverage this knowledge across the other pieces of our intelligence. So for example, we do it for the smart DNS. So you can understand what was the problem and then deploy it on a network as a DNS which can classify certain patterns. Then you can use it for this physical, so for this family protection, because when you learn this is an adult content page, you want to make sure your children doesn't have access to it, right? Then when we talk about the data, when we've seen a problematic data, we can basically isolate them and send them through, let's say, a VPN. So for example, you have a mobile banking application and we are trying to figure it out the automated way that we will turn on and off a VPN channels for that specific communication just to make sure you are secured. All this is not driven by humans at all at the moment. All this kind of data distribution is basically being decided automatically on the background. I wanted to give you a last overview or last 2 slides in here, and then we will get into discussion and possibly even some real-life data if I will be able to connect to our backend. So what I believe it's really needed these days to actually protect your digital life, let's say, is to start with the 2 solutions, at least within your home and your devices you're carrying with you every day, so cell phones and laptops. And that basically includes some solution, some endpoint protection on your end device. That's what you're really familiar with, like antivirus and so on. But also a network protection. So to prevent attacks, what I've just showed you in here with the camera, The only way to do it is to basically have a smart router or smart gateway to your home, which will be able to detect those types of attacks coming to your home network and monitor whatever is going on and how to prevent such a behavior, right? So there are different ways of deployment. In our case, we basically put the firmware on the router to create a sort of digital security layer in there, which monitors the behavior and goes for those patterns, as I told you. But for every one of you in here, I believe this is the next thing you sort of should do with your home network, is to basically bring a security piece of the firmware in there, either on your router or replace your router, to make sure that all the other connected devices you have at home are protected. So what we try to achieve is simple and create a platform which is sort of automatically driven and create security controls and insights. So for each of the things you do, you basically have a involvement and deep knowledge of the security problems and protection. Then you have a controls, so you as a homeowner can decide which rules are okay and which not. So if you really want to let your camera to talk to a Chinese server, I don't think it's a good idea, but you potentially can set those rules. And insights, so actually be in charge of whatever is going on in your home and know what's going on in your home. The last part, and that's a challenges we sort of had in the last couple of years. I will actually tell you a personal story in here. In 2014, I was working in a threat labs back then. So basically a department which is taking care of all the new updates for the end consumers and making sure the new detections are distributed in the right way to the end users. And I was there by myself on a Christmas duty on a December 24th, 2014, where most of the systems are already been partly automated. So they've been already kind of creating the detections automatically. And the problem, what happened was that our system had a certain patterns and certain ways of creating the detections. So you basically jumped in the new sample. You created the feature sets and basically outputs of the feature sets, and you classify them against the good or malicious sample set and decided if it's going to be detected or not. Our competitor from eastern part of the globe basically figured out a way how we do this. So they figured out a way how we do the automated detection in there and what samples to send us to our AI basically that we create a false positive, right? So basically what they did was they modified a Windows exe login sample. So basically when you're logging into Windows, there's a Windows login exe on the background running, which allows you to log into your PC. And we created a false detection, which was not detecting all the Windows exe logins, but certain versions of it for the new versions of XP back then and some, I don't know, what was it, Windows 8 maybe, 2014. And what happened was that this actually passed our clean set database set and we released it to our user base. So basically the antivirus itself killed some of the Windows login exe files and caused quite a bit of the trouble. And when we reverse engineered what everything happened, we kind of, that update was outside for like 20 minutes before we noticed, right? Maybe even less, maybe like 10, and it was automatically roll out and everything. So that was not a big issue. But the way how the competitors basically tried to figure out the way how our system works, reverse engineer it on the PC and send us the samples was really nasty one, right? Since then, we rebuilt the systems. We actually use the different tactics, and it's completely different than it was in 2014. But what I wanted to point out is that the biggest enemy of the AI and the automated detection today is eventually another hacker which can figure out the way how it's working and try to fool it, which is kind of common. And this is what we've seen. Basically, when you have one poisoned sample or one poisoned infection within your system, which could cause a trouble, it's completely affecting your detection engine. So if you create one misclassification, it could turn the entire engine towards the different side, to the dark side, let's say. So that's a sort of problem in here. Okay, last slide, I promise. So when I talk about how much we actually update, this is again from yesterday. This is every 3 minutes, or every 3 to 5 minutes, there's a small update, which goes directly to the end user. And basically this includes this entire process of the classification of the new samples through simplification of the data, through the simplification of the fingerprint/detection towards the user base. So what you see in here are the numbers of new detections released every 3 minutes yesterday from the afternoon. So you see that PE files, for example, are the unique fingerprints and the naming, let's say, or descriptions of the malware samples for PC. So you see within this 5-minute window, there were like 66 of them with the highest one on the top. which has been released, which is quite a lot if you think about it from the perspective of 5-minute window globally. With that said, I'm done with the slides. It's a time for questions, if you have any. And perhaps if we will have a few more minutes, I can try to log in and give you some live data. But for that, I would need to have a camera off. Any questions? Sorry? Possibly yes, but it will take a few for a while. We can do it after if you want. I have some predefined scripts which I really don't want to show in here. Somebody will be like, hey, this is how I'm going to do it. Any other questions? Here we go.
So the attack data that you're showing earlier, is that based off of specifically devices that you're protecting, like honeypots around the world?
Let's do it this way. I will give you mic.
For the threat data that you were, or the attack data you were showing earlier, how is that built? Is that just strictly devices that you guys are protecting? Is that honeypots, various other things? How do you do that?
So the question was if the data you saw were actually from the honeypots and all the other inputs to Avast. It's exactly directly from the end user base. So basically every single end user is sort of the honeypot in this case because he's opening some malicious content and that's being prevented on his device, but it's also being encountered in the database. So those are actually arrived data from our user base. So imagine you have a PC antivirus from Avast installed, you go on a malicious website and we kind of block it. At that point it's being encountered there. So not really a honeypot, it's just the end user base. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, he was first.
So the solution you've described is for a particular endpoint, a particular home, if you will. That still leaves all of the other people who are not applying a solution, and all of those unsecured devices can be used to launch DDoS attacks or various other nefarious things. What's the solution to that problem?
It's a good question. I mean, part of the solution can theoretically exist on a network. So, for example, I'm always saying that the attacks are still really stupid and simple because what you can basically do is to just apply a filters on a DNS and you are still solving like 60–70% of attacks, these days, from what we've seen at least. So theoretically, the simplistic solution to kind of expand over the home network is to just have a smart DNS with the provider of the internet itself. It helps you quite a bit. And then you can go to the next levels, right? Then you can go to like NetFlow analysis and so on the network itself, which will help you to protect everything beyond the router. Any other question? Thank you, guys. Okay. Yeah.